as I thought and read about this week about transmission, I thought a lot, I guess, over the past couple years as we did curriculum mapping about ethical dilemmas, and especially with cultural appropriation. But I hadn't really thought about it in the terms of transmission and really with perhaps preconceived notions. So, one of the things that I was really kind of convicted about over the readings this week is which traditions are being prioritized or marginalized if we as educators are not taking on the responsibility. I really appreciated how Dr. B reframed that, and the way that we're sharing it needs to be with great care. And I loved that expression, with great care, so that it's respectful, it's intentional, and it's making meaningful choices. And I think these meaningful choices have to be reevaluated each year. So one example that is really tangible for me is that I was teaching at a Judeo-Christian school. And as we started to have a lot more exchange students, international presence, they realized that these 4 chapels each year were really only honoring a small segment of the student body, and that it wasn't necessarily showing intentional care and choices because it was only in this small segment. And so another thing we started really realizing is that all of our students didn't go to church, didn't have a religious part of their family background. And so then when we would do things, for instance, only holiday based, or Easter's coming up this weekend, assuming that children knew what the Easter story was about, that they were going to celebrate this in some way. Over Christmas, assuming that they knew Christmas carols rather than perhaps just winter songs. And what I started to realize was that I really could not assume that students' background was similar to mine. And so we were part of a task force that has now changed the language. And so the language, to be intentional, to be respectful, to be meaningful, is so that whoever gets up now says, in the spirit of my faith, or they say something like, according to my tradition, so that they're honoring those traditions. Something that I really switched in the past couple of years. I think I talked a little bit about interval projects, and thank you for your feedback on that. And that wasn't an extra element, not just finding one in, it would say a folk song or a Christmas carol or a sports song like Taking Out the Ball Game, or we would always use Happy Birthday for a major second, or Here Comes the Bride for a fourth, with the fourth finger. Is we would instead have the students submit their top 2 favorite pop songs, and we would see that there would be a lot of crossover, right? And then they would also ask their parents 2 of their favorite songs. And so then we got things like We Will Rock You, or a lot of the Beatles, and a lot of even kind of some musical theater songs. So then we compared and listened to, and I think this was something that we discussed in the last video, and sort of the feedback is not just listening for ascending intervals, but listening for descending intervals. And then, as you were saying, pop music is very rhythmic based, or rap. What rhythms do we see over and over again? And then maybe could we write out some of those rhythms? And then the other thing is that I want to touch on is with appropriation, was singing in different languages. So anytime I had an exchange student, I tried to do a little personal interview with them, which we talked about, like in Shippers, is an indication of really how to be, when you're interviewing the learners and different interpretations, that you can find more about the roots of their cultural context and their social economics. So for instance, we had a lot of students from China, but then we also had a lot of students from different areas, and I couldn't just assume that they would have similar backgrounds. But something that I did invite them to do was help me pick a piece. And then as they felt comfortable, especially with addiction, helping to put them in a light where they were the expert. And some of my students really didn't feel comfortable talking in front of the class, and others just lit up with the chance that they got to share something that nobody else in that choral setting had done before. And they were able to talk about, for instance, how they celebrated a holiday in the spring, what method they gave gifts. That was a common one. If you're giving gifts at a Christmas or a holiday or an exchange of a celebration, for instance, a quinceañera or any sort of special birthdays. And so now that I'm thinking about notation a lot this week in the rote verse note, trying to rethink, how am I allowing notation to be inclusive? So I really liked the Frautley quote that was speaking music, not just reading it. We wouldn't want people to only know DOG as 3 isolated letters and not have any notion that there's an animal, right? So if we're teaching music, the 5 lines and 4 spaces, that seems very disconnected, whereas perhaps a rhythm that they heard on the radio on the way over to school might really connect with that. Or something I'm looking into is the wind. And so one of my pieces has the voice of a wind and a summer wind, but then the realization that you or the singer could be the wind. So now I'm starting to look into what other songs might they know. For instance, some Disney ones like Colors of the Wind with Pocahontas, or the Frozen 2 wind that goes back and forth. A lot of the students love Encanto. That's a new film, obviously, that just came out. And that one has the wind that's the voice of the family madrigal. So I'm looking forward to diving in more, and especially with the rote verse note, and looking at the ethical transmission and how to apply that to the future project or final project.